Welcome to Next to Madison, a podcast to help you live your best life.
Welcome back, you guys. We are doing part 2 with Dr. Gail Gross. And this episode, if you didn't listen to last week's episode about dreams, definitely listen to that one as well. This one is all about the brain. Did you know that we only use like 10% of our brain? And our thoughts and our brain is the root of all our happiness and also all our problems. So we're going to find out more about the brain, how if you're a mother or a father, how to, develop your baby's brain. The brain is our most important thing. It's where we function and where we do all our things. So with that being said, I'm going to bring back on our guest on Next to Madison with Dr. Gross. Welcome back. I'm so excited. Today we were talking about the brain. So the first question I want to ask, because I've heard this many times, that we only use 10% of our brain.
Oh, what a brilliant question. Thank you for that question. That's an anecdote. I don't know how it got started. I don't know why it got started. It has a lot to do with Einstein. You have this whole idea that Einstein used only 10% of his brain. So if Einstein used 10% of his brain, then we all must be using just 4 or 5 or 6% of our brain. But actually, that's not how the brain works. The brain works like an orchestra. So when we process information, we're using all of our brain. We can't isolate what part of our brain we're going to use. And so different parts of our brain are responsible for different things. For example, the motor part of our brain, or the emotional part of our brain, or the prefrontal cortex, which is our executive function, our abstract thinking. In fact, it's this part of our brain that makes us human, that makes us think abstractly, problem solve. We call it executive function, and that's the prefrontal cortex. And we have a very extraordinary large prefrontal cortex. And then we have this part of our brain called the hippocampus, and it sort of looks like a little seahorse, and that's where our learning is, and that's where our memory is. And then we have the amygdala, and the amygdala is the part of our brain that holds our primitive, what we call the flight or fight part of our brain, and it holds our emotional world. So when we are evolving, as we evolve and we develop this huge prefrontal cortex, when that happened, we really accelerated in so many ways, in the things that we created and the illnesses we've solved, and the rockets we've sent off to the moon. But believe this or not, our amygdala, our flight or fight system, is no different than our primitive cave relatives. So we have stayed in the cave with our emotions. We've evolved and developed with our abstract thinking, our critical thinking, but not with our emotions. So if I hurt your feelings, and by the way, you look very pretty.
Oh, thank you. Likewise.
But if I've hurt your feelings, then what's going to happen? Your heart rate's going to go up. Your adrenaline's going to start pumping. You'll overproduce cortisol because I've hurt your feelings. And now the hormones in our body are getting pumped up to address the challenge of those hurt feelings. And in primitive man, those hurt feelings may define fighting or running. So if I'm a person and I'm fishing by the side of the river, and I'm a caveman, and somebody comes by and I hear them, and now I'm worried about my mate in the cave or my baby in the cave, and I'm worried about maybe it's a tiger that's come up. Is he going to eat me? So now suddenly I'm in what we call fight or flight, and my body is preparing to either flee or fight. And so it makes my heart beat faster. It makes my blood pressure pump up. It makes the blood pull away from my skin so that if I get attacked, I won't bleed as badly. I'm overproducing now white cells so that if I get cut or bitten, that have a chance to fight the infection. So my whole body is preparing itself for
Wow.
fight or flight. And today, our problems are emotional mainly, except we're all in all these wars. So there you have our primitive, our primitive brain. But if I hurt your feelings, then the same system would completely organize itself to either fight or flee, even though we're just talking about hurt feelings. And if it's sustained hurt feelings, say we're working together in an office and every day I hurt your feelings, well, now the consistency is making you overproduce all day long cortisol, one of the most powerful stress hormones. We need cortisol for function, but when we overproduce it, it can kill us because it's like drinking a bottle of battery fluid. There's, you're not going to punch me in the nose for hurting your feelings. So you have to sit with them. And that consistent amount of stress makes my body need more and more cortisol. Well, it's got to find that cortisol. So it starts scavenging all over my body, and it's taking it from my immunities, which is why people who are stressed all the time or in jobs they hate or high powered, for example, in the army or in places where they are in danger, well, they're overproducing cortisol all day long. And therefore, it's having a tremendous effect on brain architecture and impulse control. Now, when children are dealing with too much cortisol, that can change brain architecture and impulse control forevermore if the consistency of the stress is in the first 3 years of life. And on the other hand, you and I may come up with some catastrophic illness from being under stress because that scavenging for cortisol is going to take it from my immunities. That's one of the places it's going to take it from.
Because I've heard that if you're unhappy or stressed, that you are more prone to illness.
A smart doctor, when you go to a doctor and you say, I had a heart attack, God forbid, or I have whatever, God forbid, and a smart doctor will say, when did you notice this? When did it first happen? Because what he's really wanting to know is, did any particular event, could you remember any event which started this ball rolling? Whether it was a divorce or a death or a fight with a friend that became a long-term alienation or separation from parents or a brother you don't speak to or a sister you don't speak to, or anything that is something you can't do anything about.
I mean, that makes complete sense because I think in today's world, especially now with everything, people are harboring a lot of anger and fear from just our uncertain future, and I think it's leading to more disease and death.
Your statements and questions are brilliant, and actually that really is the most brilliant, because what we're all walking around with is a form of post-traumatic stress disorder. If I look at an MRI of the brain of a child that is in an institution like a orphanage or something,
Okay.
and they've been there for 3 years, many times that child's brain will not light up where it needs to light up anymore, and they have a form of post-traumatic stress disorder. And if it's been consistent and it's been for the first 3 years, it's very hard to turn that around. And when all of us are dealing with so much uncertainty and such insecurity, and whether it's job insecurity or family insecurity or health insecurity, or just the grieving of losing so many relatives and so forth, friends to COVID. I mean, gosh, I can't tell you how many friends I've lost in the last couple of years. It's stunning. And at the end of the day, we're all walking around with and children also, because they're uncertain. And so the whole thing is to teach children how to self-manage, how to manage their stress, and to teach us how to manage our stress so that we can then take control of our problem. Self-mastery, really, and become, really to become capable of handling things so that we gain a certain sense of control.
So the common thing now is and it's kind of become like the running joke. Hey, life's really good. All you have to do is just turn off the social media and turn off the news and walk outside. There's birds singing, there's sunshine, there's fresh air. Life is good. Nothing exists in that moment. And then you turn on the media, which was designed, I know now, to only promote fear because fear sells. Which is why we don't see news media about people getting promotions and people being saved and all this stuff. We only see this bad, horrible stuff. So it's like, how do you deal with not living under a rock, but also like still trying to stay in a very like, I guess, positive mindset when all you see all day thrown at you is shit all day? Great
question. And of course, it's to take your own authority. At the end of the day, in the other segment, we talked about consciousness. Yeah. And to be conscious, to step into your adult, you have to take your own authority. That's no matter what. And believe it or not, a huge percentage of people never do. They live and die unconsciously. They never can take their own authority. And unless you can take your own authority, you can't ever be the master of your own ship. And therefore, you're maneuvered and manipulated by the feelings of other people, not necessarily the facts of an event, but the feelings of other people. And so you're dealing with other people's problems and you're taking them onto yourself, not that you're empathizing or sympathizing with them, but that their problems are now affecting you because they can't get a hold of their problems. They're not dealing with them consciously. So they're acting out and you're the recipient of, where they're projecting onto you their problems. And it takes maturity to step back and say, this really is not about me. This is really this person's problem. Yeah. And if I allow this to influence me, then that's my fault. It's not that person's fault. I'll have to take the responsibility for allowing that person to negatively project onto me and therefore influence my life.
Well, they say, like, one of the things that I've heard a lot is when somebody's rude to you, like, let's say you're at a grocery store and somebody's just rude to you, like, usually it typically has nothing to do with you. Nothing. But because it was directed towards us, we automatically take responsibility or blame, but it really, most of what people are angry about has nothing to do with you.
We all have this critical parent inside of our head. We all, and we're having a running conversation with that all day long. That little critical, go ahead.
Oh, that I was saying, no, you're right.
So that little critical person is saying, you can't do this, you shouldn't do this. If so-and-so feels this way, don't, just let it be, just go along with them, let them hurt your feelings. It doesn't really matter, but it does matter. And it's assaulting your self-esteem. And little by little, it chips away at your self-esteem. So at the end of the day, the real person you have to confront is not that person who's hurting your feelings, but this person from your childhood, that critical parent. And you have to learn how to confront that critical parent and say to the critical parent, stop. That's not who I am anymore. That was a young child who had low self-esteem perhaps, or was insecure perhaps, or was just young perhaps. That's not me today. And I'm not, you stick with me, I'm going to act for both of us. So I was at a TED conference once, and a doctor who had schizophrenia was the speaker. And she talked about being institutionalized for a certain amount of time. And the treatments were not being effective. And then a new doctor came to see her and said, I'm going to teach you how to get out of this hospital and how to deal with your schizophrenia. And we all know there's, just medicine for schizophrenia, but we don't really think in terms of really being able to live a wonderful life and not have to deal with schizophrenia. But I don't know if you ever saw the movie A Beautiful Mind. And you see that he reaches a place in his life where he confronts his delusions. He says, I've grown up, but you're still teenagers. So this doesn't compute. You must be a delusion. And by turning his back away from the delusion, he's on the road to health. Now, there are still things he'll always have to do. He'll always have to perhaps not necessarily take medicine, and he will have to have a biofeedback approach where he confronts the delusion. And the more he confronts the delusion, the less he'll have delusions. And the less he has delusions, the healthier the mind, the healthier the brain. So in this situation, where a person, this woman who was a professor who was schizophrenic, a doctor who was schizophrenic, a psychiatrist, he taught her how to confront her delusions and her voices. So somebody raised their hand from the audience at TED and said, well, here you are giving a TED talk. Did you have that inner voice today? She said, absolutely, I did. And just before I stepped on the stage, my critical parent popped up, and that inner voice said, why are you doing this? You're not capable of doing this. You have schizophrenia, blah, blah, blah. And she said, I confronted that voice. And I said, no, that's not me anymore. I can have control over this. I have my own authority. I can handle this. I'm going to handle it. I've got this for both of us. And then another man raised his hand and he said, well, you're saying that you actually still heard voices today? And she looked at him and said, didn't you? And I just thought that was just perfect, because everybody, it's all, mental illness is just an exaggeration of health in a certain way. And so we all deal with this inner critical voice. Mm-hmm. And the key is to take our own authority. And when people are projecting onto us, we don't have to accept that projection. On the other hand, if we feel a compulsion to project onto other people, we need to look critically at what we're projecting. Take it back to ourselves, not suppress it, not abandon it, but integrate it. So we know where it is inside of us, and we can draw it out anytime we want.
Yeah.
And now, when we override the impulse to project onto others, the more we override that impulse, the less often we project onto others, and pretty soon the compulsion goes away. That's the secret behind Alcoholics Anonymous. That's the secret behind Foods Anonymous. That's the process to deal with all addictions, to override the compulsion, to override the impulse consciously, deliberately, in our adults, take our own authority. And when we do that, the more we do that, the lower the decibels of the desire to take that next drink, eat that next chocolate, or have that next sexual encounter. We've taken control. We have, going back to that little Garden of Eden, you were given free choice, free will.
Yes.
And that, when we talk about the secret, the second step to just being a positive thinker is to deliberately override these impulses. And when we do that, ultimately they go away. That doesn't mean we can't resurrect them, because we know we integrated them and we know where they are. A person can be an alcoholic and then not have a drink for 30 years and then suddenly take a drink and cascades right back into alcoholism. So we can always tap into that which we've integrated. But the key is to integrate it. Carl Jung, who actually one of the people who started Alcoholics Anonymous, I think was a patient or a friend of his. And so much of that approach is Jungian. And he tells us that we have the ability to face our shadow material. If we face our shadow material, what we don't know about ourselves or don't want to know, that we're projecting onto other people, if we face it and integrate it, then we don't have to act it out, and now we're free.
I mean, that makes total sense, but it's that constant like reminding yourself to kind of get there. So let's talk about, because you brought up The Secret, and they talk a lot about manifestations, right? So it's not only thinking positive, but it's going into the next thing. So let's talk about how the mind works to create your reality. Because they say what you're experiencing in your life today, your thoughts got you there.
Well, let's go back to shadow material.
Okay.
That'll explain it very well.
Okay.
So Jung tells us that in this unconscious, there are many beings of us. We would all be schizophrenic, except that we're aware that we have these other trees in our forest that are all parts of us. You have the greedy tree, you have the generous tree, you have the rejecting tree, you have the embracing tree, you have the compassionate tree, you have the not compassionate tree, you have the empathetic tree, generous tree, greedy tree. As Freud said, this is the human dilemma. All this fabric is what it is to be a human being. So that we don't act all these pieces out takes consciousness, takes free will, takes choice, takes a deliberate decision to be altruistic, compassionate, empathic, not greedy, not rejecting, though we can still slip into those pieces because that's what it is to be human. So I know over time we've all seen these people, a lot of these. I remember on television a particular evangelical minister, and he was telling everybody, don't commit adultery, don't commit adultery. And then some reporter followed him, and of course, to a motel where he was committing adultery. And then he cried, and it was a terrible situation. But in Jungian work, we say the pointing finger has 3 fingers pointing back. So when we're projecting out something about ourselves that we don't want to deal with, it has a charge. And we get really worked up, and we talk other people into being really worked up. And that's how you know it's a projection, because it has a charge. So when we do that, we're projecting out something of ourselves that we don't want to deal with, or are not dealing with, or not paying attention to. But ultimately, this suppressing of who we really are will have to come out somewhere. And so people start acting out. That fellow who was yelling adulterer, adulterer, ultimately he was committing adultery. So it was playing out on a big enough screen where he forced the situation out in such a way that it was public humiliation, embarrassment, and punishment. So he triggered a situation. Remember, one of the people who was running for office, I don't want to name names, but he said he wasn't committing adultery. Just follow me, he said. And so a reporter followed him, and he found out that he was committing adultery. So at the end of the day, people often set themselves up to be punished on a big field where they're embarrassed and so forth. So at the end of the day, the human dilemma has opportunity on the other side of it. We have the opportunity to do the right thing, the good thing. And to help ourselves is to unite the opposites within us, the shadow and the light. Nobody is all light. It's impossible to be all light. You know, if we were all light, even when we talk about angels, we talk about the dark side, the light side. Nobody is perfect. There's, as Freud says, this human dilemma. So what we need to do is unite the opposites within us, within our unconscious. If we don't bring to consciousness what we're suppressing and unite it with our light and our dark, then we're doomed to act it out in the outer world, just like the fellow who's yelling adulterer, even though he himself was committing adultery. So we have to face the shadow within us. And shadow isn't bad. It's not like some horrible thing. It's just unknown to us. It's part of us that's suppressed, that we're unaware of. So what we have to do is we have to bring that part to consciousness. And we do that through inner work. And when we do the inner work, we learn how to unite these opposite pieces of us. And when we do that, we move forward into a larger us. And here, it's in this place, I call it the Valley of Despair. Psychology, we call it the neutral zone, but I don't think of it as neutral because, you're thrown into this space when you're shocked or upset or having a fight or upset with someone you love, or if someone dies or you're grieving, and you're thrown into this place in the middle with no familiar structures, no familiar scaffolding. You can't pull up your defenses because you're frightened, you're upset, you're hurt, you're bruised, you're grieving, or any other issues that are upsetting you. It's very hard to, when you're in the middle of being upset, to be super duper calm and act, just wonderfully. It's very hard to do that.
It is, yeah.
And so in this valley of despair, when we're drawn to the bottom of who we are, and we do the inner work, we journal, we meditate, we pay attention to our dreams, we take time alone for ourselves, we take a walk, we contemplate, we listen to Baroque music. It's in this place that we can find the shadow and hold the tension of that experience. And it's that tension that will project us forward. So now to your question about manifestation, it is in this place, without scaffolding, without structure, that we can manifest. Why? Because this is the place where we are completely undefended. If you're in a hospital, I had a very, very wonderful professor who was a doctor. He was at one time the head of heart and lung at Johns Hopkins. I'm not 100%. But he was a wonderful doctor, and he was one of my professors. And he used to say, when he went onto a hospital ward and he walked into a patient's room and he says, "Mrs. Smith, I'm very sorry to tell you, there's nothing left that we can do for you. Get your affairs in order. Say goodbye to your loved ones. You have 2 months." And when the patient is told that, sometimes the shock is so great to the psyche, and the stress is so traumatizing, such a primary trauma. I'm not going to exist anymore. Imagine.
Yeah.
In that moment, you can be thrown into this, what I call the valley of despair, many times psychologists call the neutral zone. And in this place, that's where manifestation can happen. So when you are at the bottom of the well, in a primary trauma, and traumatized, in the most dramatic way, in 2 months, I won't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Now you can manifest. This is where people have spontaneous remissions. This is where, because we are basically molecules. Understanding Einstein's theory of relativity, when Einstein tells us that mass, this is mass, our table is mass, our glass of almond milk is mass,
Yeah.
mass. That mass equals energy. So when Einstein tells us that, what he's really telling us is there is no solid. I mean, this is a very simplistic way of understanding it, but nothing is really solid, including us. We're just vibrating energy. I mean, it sounds very woo-woo to say that, but this table, if you take a piece of ice, and if you take a glass of water, water is H2O. No matter what you do with it, it is H2O, hydrogen and oxygen. And now when I take water and I put it under a Bunsen burner and it heats it up, it can make it into steam, but it's still H2O. It doesn't look the same. It's not water anymore, but it is water, but now it's steam.
Yeah.
Those molecules have been heated up to a speed. Now they're moving very rapidly. And because they're heated and they're moving so rapidly, they look like steam. Now, if I take this glass of water and I put it in the freezer, I'll make an ice cube. Now it's still H2O.
Right.
But now it looks completely different. And it looks like a solid. And it looks, in fact, frozen like an ice cube. But those are still molecules. They're just frozen molecules, so they're moving at a very slow speed. And that's how manifestation happens, because when we're traumatized and we're undefended, completely undefended, we're leaking energy. In fact, we're too weak to install any defenses because we're so upset. It's in that state that there can be a shift.
Okay, so the best way to manifest something in your life is to let your guard down.
Is to surrender.
Okay.
And there are many, they're in my other book on The Only Way Out is Through. I talk about all of this in that book. This is really still from that book. And I talk about all the mythology that we know. Jung believed that mythology was really the story, the different stories of what it is to be human, and human situations that we get into, that our unconscious relates to us, and then we write a story, because we are a people of stories. We are our stories. Right. From the time we sat around in the cave, or around the fire, we communicated through our stories. And so at the end of the day, that way of expressing ourselves is a mythology. It comes out as, whether it's Greek mythology or Roman mythology or Peruvian mythology or African mythology. In fact, Joseph Campbell was so brilliant, and he took all the myths from around the world and he showed the common thread that moved through all of them, that in one way or another, we all were living with the same myths. They were the human myths of what it is to be a human being. They were the myths from our unconscious. So in a sense, that's how we relate to others, through our mythology, through our stories. And that's how we shift states of consciousness. So when we shift states of consciousness, we have the opportunity to manifest.
So it's so interesting. There's like so much information, because I'm just like thinking, like, everybody wants to manifest something, speed something up that they're working on. They want it to go like a certain way. So if somebody's listening right now and they say, I really want this deal to go through, they're working on a deal, what should they do to get their mind to surrender in order to be in a manifestation mode?
Okay, so the part two, what I was going to say about the myth was that Jung taught through mythology as a result. So he would tell you that, I'll tell you a little myth and that'll answer your question.
Okay.
So here's a little myth. So now Adonis falls in love with Persephone, and she's a mortal. She's not a goddess. And his mother says, no, Aphrodite says, no, 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 you cannot marry her. She's mortal and I won't have it. She's not good enough for you, as all mothers.
Yeah.
So not me, because I have a wonderful daughter-in-law and she's my precious person.
Oh God, very lucky, right? Yeah.
Very lucky. Anyway, so when he begs his mother and argues with his mother and confronts his mother, and finally she says, all right, fine. I'm going to give her a number of tests. She's going to fail the tests, but okay. I'll give her these tests, and if she manages to succeed, you can marry her. So one test is more difficult from the other. It's like seeds on the ground, but it's like a whole storeroom full of seeds and all different kinds of seeds. And by the morning, she has to separate out piles and piles and piles of red seeds, blue seeds, green seeds, brown seeds, purple seeds, all different color seeds. She just sits down and thinks, I can't possibly do this. This is just not possible. She starts to cry. She cries herself to sleep. She falls asleep. And the next day, all the seeds are completely separated and in individual piles because the little bugs that were around helped her out. So you could say that parts of her psyche, when she surrendered, figured out how to solve the problem. And then she has the next test and the next test and the next test. And each test, they're overwhelming. She cannot possibly do it. She cries, she falls asleep, whatever happens, then the universe has a chance to work on her behalf because she's surrendered. So now, and the universe is just our unconscious in a big projection, if you will. So in a sense, because it's your universe. So this is the way we manifest. We surrender and and we surrender by taking our own authority. We don't surrender by contemplating our navel. That's not the way to surrender. We surrender in a conscious way, in a deliberate way.
So is that like I had an
we do our inner work.
Okay.
And that's what projects us to the larger us. And often that's where the answers are. That's where health is.
And I mean,
you've heard people say, in fact, I had a friend who was an amazing heart surgeon. I won't mention his name either, but he told me this story, and I interviewed him for PBS a number of years ago, and he told me this story. And the story was that he had a patient, and the patient was going in for a heart bypass, and when they opened the patient up, she had cancer. So he closed her up, and he told the family, doesn't make sense to do the bypass because she's filled with cancer. She has a very short period. Why put her through more? 25 years later, that lady was in a car wreck. And
25 years
later, and her family called my friend and said, would you sit in on her autopsy? And he said, I absolutely will. I'm just stunned that she lived 25 years. I want to see what's going on there. And when they opened this lady up during the autopsy, she had no heart disease and she had no cancer. So now my friend said to the family, did she go to a healer? No. Did she follow some particular health diet? No. Did she take any kind of pills or alternative medicine? No. What did she do? She didn't do anything. She just decided to live her life. And there are many stories.
Wow.
Many stories like this. In fact, I saw a wonderful movie. I wish to this day, if any of your viewers out there can tell me the name of this movie, I'll be so happy. but I saw it a number of years ago, and it's a true story, and it was about a woman who has a terrible day. And in the day, she goes to the doctor, and the doctor tells her she has 6 months to live. She has I think it was thoracic cancer. I can't remember, but it was so terrible and no cure. And that was that. Then she goes to work, and her office fires her. And now she goes to meet her lover to tell him all this terrible news, and he can't deal with it, and he breaks up with her. And now she goes home, and she knows she only has 6 months to live. So she goes through the yellow pages, and she finds a place to rent, and it's a loft, like a penthouse loft. And you can only rent it for 6 months because it's going to be redone. And so they'll rent it to her for 6 months. So she takes all of her credit cards. She also goes to her ATM. She takes all of her money. She doesn't take any clothes. She doesn't take any furniture. She doesn't even lock her door. She just takes her car keys, and she goes to the bank. She gets all of her money, all of her everything that's financial, and she goes and rents this apartment for 6 months, and she never leaves it for 6 months. But in that 6 months, she orders all the things she loves to eat. Oh, the other thing that happens is she's now in this apartment and she goes to the balcony, and she takes off all of her clothes and throws everything off the balcony, including her socks, her shoes, her underwear, everything. She takes a shower, and now she has no clothes. So she pulls one of the drapes off of this penthouse, which has like 24 feet high ceilings, and she wraps herself up in the drape. And then only thing in her apartment, there's no furniture or anything, but there's a telephone and a yellow pages. So she calls for the clothes that she loves. She calls the department store, and she says, please, I want to have this, here's my size. Then she calls the furniture company. All the furniture she ever wanted that she never would allow herself to have. She says, I want this, please deliver it. And then she orders all the food she always loved, but was always watching her weight or whatever. She orders all the food that she loves and the wine that she loves, and everything's on and delivered. And she always wanted to learn how to play the guitar. And when she was a little girl, she even stole a guitar. So she buys, but she got caught and had to return it. So she buys a guitar and a television and a program for the television. So she learns how to play the guitar. And now she's only two people she has anything to do with are the people who deliver to her. The food delivery people and the furniture, clothes, etc. So now 6 months passes. She doesn't realize 6 months have passed, but her card won't work anymore. And the next card won't work anymore. And the next card won't work. And she says, what's the date? On the phone, and they tell her the date. She's 6 months have passed. And then she opens her door, and she sees there's an eviction notice on her door. And it says, you only rented this apartment for 6 months. We need to have it back. Goodbye. And so what she has is her guitar. She's out of money completely. She has her guitar, and she has learned in that 6 months how to play the guitar by this program on her TV. Of course, it's not a typical sound because she didn't have a real teacher. She learned online, basically. Yeah. So now she leaves the apartment with nothing, just the clothes that she has, and she sits down under a tree in the park in New York, and she has a hat out, and she starts playing and singing for money. And this very famous music group that has come home from a gig in the morning, in the wee hours of the morning, are passing through this park, I guess it was Central Park, and they hear this unusual sound and this singing. To make a long story short, they hire this woman, and she goes on to be with them. But I missed one important point. She went to the doctor just before she leaves her house, her apartment, and she says to the doctor, why didn't she die? What happened?
Yeah.
6 months have passed, and the doctor examines her and says, you're in remission. I've never seen this ever in my life. You're completely healed. And she said, well, how's that possible? And she said, I don't know. She said, I've read in the literature that once in a while, but very rarely, when the person completely changes their life, that the cancer no longer recognizes the host and leaves the body. And that woman is alive and well today. And in this band, whatever the band is.
I mean, isn't that amazing? Because yeah, and then you've also heard the stories where somebody will be misdiagnosed and then they never had it and they die.
Well,
Because
right.
mind is just, it's just
So
so
powerful.
powerful. So really it's kind of just surrender. But that's why they say like change is good. A lot of people don't like change because it's the unknown coming in. But change is good because it can propel you towards where you need to go or what you need to do.
You shift states of consciousness. There are many states of consciousness. And you can shift states of consciousness when you shift your focus onto yourself. Not in an egocentric way, but doing the things that you want to do. Doing the things eating the things you would like to eat. Being kind, in the 10 Commandments, it says, love your neighbor like yourself. The first one to love is yourself. You can't really love other people until you really love yourself, because you're challenged by all these insecurities that you experience because you don't love yourself. And at the end of the day, it's that ruins relationships. But if you love yourself, you honor your own authority, you don't project onto other people. Now you have a chance to really live life, to really live a happy life, a balanced life, because you're living the authentic life. You're self-actualized. And that's when, by surrendering to yourself, now anything can happen.
So well said. Did everyone catch that? So well said. So it is true. It's just kind of let it go and just do what you got to do.
When I talk about the secret and I say it's simplistic because it takes another step. And the other step is the inner work. The inner work that releases you to be reborn, to be renewed. And renewal can only happen when we integrate the opposites within ourselves. The opposites in ourselves are that if by denying half of ourselves, the half that's shadow, we're doomed to act it out. If we integrate that part of ourselves, not only will we not act it out, but we override the impulse to act it out, and pretty soon the desire goes away. And now we're conscious.
So interesting. So before we wrap up, I just want to talk about, because we're talking about the manifestation in the brain, vision boards. So you hear, like, if you want to manifest stuff, put a vision board on the amount of money you want to make, where you want to live, work, family, whatnot, so you can consciously always see it.
Okay, so what is a vision board? It's the outer manifestation of the inner desire, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is a dream? First, we dream what we want, or what our unconscious is telling us is going to happen. And then this bridge, the dream is the bridge between the unconscious and conscious mind. And now we act. If we don't address what the unconscious is telling us interiorly through a dream, then we're going to experience it in the outer world. Because the inner world is the inner dream, and then there is the world we walk in, that's the outer dream. So if you were an Aborigine, they value dreams because they honor the inner world, and they recognize that, and that was a very famous movie. My professor used to say movies are so initiatory, but there was a very famous movie about Australia, and it was about a big flood. And again, I don't remember the name of the movie, but it was with Richard Chamberlain. And if anybody watches it, it's very interesting with Richard Chamberlain. But people are dreaming about this tidal wave, this tidal wave, this tidal wave. And ultimately there is this life-altering tidal wave. And same thing with World War II. Both Freud and Jung reported that their patients kept dreaming about a horrible war in Europe many years before it took place. That it, because of the collective unconscious, it would come into the psyche and then come out in a dream. So a vision board is the outer manifestation of what you want. And so you're creating what you want by creating this vision board. It's like creative visualization.
Yeah.
It's the exact system, really, of creative visualization.
Okay.
In fact,
So
in fact, remember in The Secret, they have that bicycle. The little boy wants his bike, and he wants his bike, and he wants his bike. And finally, he gets his bike. Well, think of a creative visualization. You put yourself in a meditative state. I always like to put Baroque music on because automatically it puts you in a meditative state.
Okay.
And now we see what we want. We'll see a red bike, or my father bought me a purple bike. He just thought he didn't think I needed to be the same as everybody. So in my day and age, when nobody had a purple bike,
Yeah, what a great dad.
a really purple bike, so, that I didn't envision. And so, but when you see it and feel it, see yourself riding it, and then somehow if you surrender to that, you just don't keep beating it like a dead horse, but you experience it through creative visualization, it can show up.
Okay, so the surrender part is...
The surrender part is not contemplating your navel. It's becoming undefended. It's not defending against it, not listening to the critical voice, not letting, not allowing other people to influence you. The key is to do the inner work. And in my book, The Only Way Out is Through. I'm going to show it one more time.
Yeah.
In this book, it tells you how to do all of these things. The only way out is through. This seems like a book about grieving, but it's really a book about renewal. It's a book about how to navigate the passages of life successfully.
Yeah.
Because every ending signals a beginning. And therefore, every ending gives us a chance to sit in that valley of despair and do the inner work, the journaling, the meditating, the dream work. And that's what propels us. By holding that tension, it's sort of like a volcano, and the tension works its way up and pushes us forward, and always into a larger container of ourselves. I do want to say one thing before we say goodbye.
Yeah.
I haven't talked about how to build your baby's brain.
Yes.
But in How to Build Your Baby's Brain, which is on this is really how to use the new understanding of neurobiology, basically, how our brain works, how to deal with the ages and stages our children pass through, so we give them the greatest opportunity to reach their full potential by knowing what will be effective at what different age and stage. And even for children, we have yoga and postures and meditation and progressive relaxation, because what you want to teach your young child is how to manage their own stress and how to open to their greatest creativity. You know, if a child is allowed to have free play, they are allowed to be creative. And the brain is by itself de-stressing because they're being imaginative and creative.
Isn't that amazing?
So I think that this is of course neurology, but I think the idea of the new neuroscience, what we know about how the brain works, and that we can enhance certain genes and we can suppress certain genes, just the way we can as adults.
That's amazing, because they always say, like, most of our trauma or our problems start in childhood. So if parents have this guide that you've gifted into the world, we can have a better society going forward.
Well, in everybody's life, there are really only two people. Nobody believes when I say this, but I know you will. Okay. And there's only two people, mother and father. And every relationship we have, even if father was not present in our life, and mother wasn't present in our life, it's our imagination, the things we hear, the way we feel about, because we are social animals and we need to bond and attach. And
Yeah.
so those early years are the most profound. We have a certain amount of genes. They can't all express themselves. So what determines what expresses and what doesn't is our environment and the environment we create for our children. And if we know what's going to happen developmentally at different ages and stages, we can impact those ages and stages.
That's
and
amazing.
I tell you how to do it right in here.
Yeah, so if you're a parent, get that book. If you're becoming a parent, get that book.
Yes.
If you're a grandparent, buy it for your
Yes.
child.
That's what we said about cortisol. Cortisol passes through the placenta. So children who have very stressed parents can become very stressed in the womb, and then look like they have ADD outside of the womb. And actually they're just on high alert from, like, it's almost like drinking caffeine, getting too much cortisol.
Yeah, which I probably had today. That was like my second cup of coffee. I'm like, all
You
right,
need
no more
my
coffee.
almond milk. You need my almond milk.
I have your almond milk in my coffee.
Oh.
At least it's something. Okay, so tell us again, if people haven't listened to the previous episode, where they can find your books and more information.
My books are all on Amazon, and you can get them in all the bookstores, and you can get them online.
Yeah.
And they've all, I will say this, How to Build Your Baby's Brain was voted the best parenting book for 2019 and 2020.
Congrats.
And it won the Indie Award, and it won the New York Big Book Award, and it won the Parenthood.com award, and oh my gosh, it won like 7 different awards. I can't even remember all of them. And The Only Way Out Is Through won the Nautilus Award and the Indie Award, and also the New York Big Book Award. They've both been bestsellers in a number of different categories. So I hope you like it. And if you buy a book and you want it signed, if you just send it to my office, I'll sign it for you.
That's amazing. So you guys, again, and her website is
www.dr,
yes.
no period, Dr. Gail, Gail, Gross, Gross.com. I always say, kids go, oh, gross, so you won't forget it. And then Gail is a simple spelling, because my mother used to say, I didn't know if you were going to be smart, and I didn't want you to have trouble in kindergarten spelling your name.
Oh, that's so cute. Well, thank you so much for coming back.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it so much.
Yeah, and everybody listening.
Wonderful questions.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And if you guys want more information, reach out, and I appreciate all of you listening, and we'll see you next time to find out who's next.
Hey, your host here, Madison Malloy. Please make sure to subscribe to the show on all podcast platforms, and please rate and review us on iTunes and Spotify. Also, if you have any questions or comments, you can email us at contact@nexttomadison.com. I thank you again for listening. Bye.